Good afternoon. This afternoon at the Intelligence Forum's Who Are You podcast, we're privileged to have Jim Knight. Jim has been the Member of Parliament for South Dorset from 2000 to 2010. He was Minister for the South West, Minister of State for Employment and Welfare Reform, and made a life peer in 2010. But you haven't come to hear me talk, so I'm going to hand over to Jim. Jim, would you like to start by telling us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got to where you are today?
I'm delighted, and thanks very much, Harry, for inviting me on the podcast. Look, I was brought up in southeast London, which is where I have returned after living in various other parts of England. I went, I was in a West End production of Oliver as a young teenager, and that reinforced and kindled my ambitions to be in theatre. So at the conclusion of my time at Cambridge University as a student, I formed a theatre company which employed me for a while, and I started a family relatively young and was managing theatres up until, I guess, about 1991, 92. So I'd have been in my mid to late 20s when I realised that through running a couple of campaigns, I was living in the army town of Warminster in Wiltshire, and there was an attempt by the local hospital trust to close one of the three wards in our little cottage hospital in Warminster, and I led a victorious campaign to save this ward for the elderly mentally ill, and kind of thought, actually, I could probably be better as a politician than as a theatre manager. So I ended up getting a job with my next door neighbour selling telephone directory advertising. It was only supposed to last for 6 months. It lasted for 10 years. I became a director of the company eventually. Whatever happened to telephone directories, I don't know. But during that time, I was elected councillor in Frome. I became mayor of Frome in Somerset, and deputy leader of Mendip District Council, which is the council that licenses the Glastonbury Festival, which is a nice bit of fun. And then I eventually got elected as an MP down in South Dorset. Beautiful constituency from Poole Harbour and Brownsea Island all the way west to Weymouth and Portland, including Durdle Door and Lulworth Cove and Chesil Beach and all of that beautiful coastal morphology. And then became a DEFRA minister. I did 3 years. The golden years for me were the 3 years as schools minister, before then becoming employment minister and a member of Gordon Brown's cabinet. And then when we lost the 2010 election, Gordon put me into the Lords, and I've been here ever since, enjoying sort of specialising as a legislator in education and technology policy in particular. And then I do some other things, chairing now 4 other boards as a non-exec, all broadly speaking in the world of education.
What was your most satisfying time in as a member of parliament and as a cabinet minister? And what were the most challenging experiences you had?
Well, the challenge came with the 2008 banking crash. And I was still at schools at the time, but I remember, so I was working closely with Ed Balls, who was the Secretary of State for Education at the time. His wife, Yvette Cooper, was the Chief Secretary to the Treasury during a banking crash. I remember having conversations with Yvette about them kind of watching all of the money leaching out of the economy, with, stamp duty not being paid, taxes not being paid, the country sharply going into recession. And then when Gordon asked me to go to employment, the brief really was to try and get unemployment to start coming down again, particularly youth unemployment, in time for the 2010 election. And that led to great satisfaction, actually. We had something called the Future Jobs Fund, which was a scheme whereby community-based organisations, public sector and voluntary sector organisations, could apply for money in a very, we worked really hard to make that a simple process for them to apply, so that they could give someone who'd been out of work for 6 months a job at the minimum wage, for up to 6 months, well, for 6 months or more, because we knew that the best way to get a job is to have a job already. Employers are much more likely to look at you if you're already in employment. And that all the assessment that we had afterwards, the Future Jobs Fund, was that it was a really good scheme. It worked really well. And we did manage to get youth unemployment falling in time for the 2010 election. Not that the electorate necessarily thanked us for it, but we pulled it off. And that required using all of my experience as a minister to work out how to drive the bus of the civil service and try and make it work.
Actually, you worked in government at a moment when they'll be studying that period for years in universities across the world, across the East.
And Harry, that's the privilege really of being here. I got elected in 2001, and within 3 months of being elected, we had 9/11. By then, I was already on the Defence Committee. So I had a ringside seat for 2 years as the decisions around Afghanistan and Iraq played out, as George Bush made his Axis of Evil speech. So I had the privilege of seeing that really massive event in terms of world politics and defence, and it cost people's lives. And then to be there in the banking crash, to then join the National Economic Council for the year that I was in cabinet, and to be there while we and see close at hand how Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling in particular responded to that, and the leadership that they showed to try and save the banking system and save the economy from total collapse. And then, whilst I was only a humble backbencher in the Lords, to be here during COVID, as a government minister, we'd been involved in various exercises to scenario plan for health pandemics, and to then see a real one happen and to sort of recall the various things that we'd done and thought about then and how they were playing out and the different decisions that governments were making, and have that sort of ringside seat again was really interesting. And now I feel like we're in a similar really big moment with President Trump ripping up the rule book around how economies work, how the alliances that were formed post-war, how they work. And I think those are as significant as, for example, 9/11 in terms of how it'll play out in the geopolitics of the world.
I can't help but ask you, I mean, the transition from the Commons to the Lords, it must be an interesting, I mean, both places intensely, incredibly interesting. But, how did you find that experience of moving from one side of things to the other?
Well, so it's odd. When I came into the Lords, I was in my 40s still. I was one of the very youngest in the Lords, and I'm there with looking across the chamber at a row of seats that contain most of Margaret Thatcher's cabinet. The people that were running the country when I was just thinking about going into politics, when I was at university, and that's weird. That's a version of imposter syndrome, and then you're sort of finding your feet in a very different culture. The culture difference between the two houses is, one is very much about the sort of the white heat of politics, and you define yourself by your difference rather than by what brings you together. Whereas in the Lords, we tend to define ourselves more by what we agree with than what we disagree with, and it's a more collegiate, more cross-party working environment, which I really enjoy now.
There's an incredible depth of knowledge across the Lords, to put it mildly.
Yes.
And it must be a great, privilege to sit amongst that. It must be an incredible thing.
Yeah, absolutely. To be with, Alf Dubs, who was in the Kindertransport, campaigning still around the rights of child refugees, to be with former governors of the Bank of England, former chiefs of defence staff, to be with the leaders of the Church of England, to be with great actors, writers, medics, you're with extraordinary people, and you're, in theory, being asked to be considered as an equal alongside those extraordinary people. It's a massive privilege.
Your work in education.
Mm.
So, what improvements would you like to see? I mean, that's a very. I'm sorry to give you that. I do apologise because I know we've only got a few minutes, but have a stab at it.
Well, look, our teachers do. We saw. I think a lot of people saw more up close than they really wanted to during COVID. What a difficult job teachers do. And they work really hard. And as a result of their hard work, actually, this country does pretty well on teaching reading and teaching maths. But we also have the second lowest level of life satisfaction amongst children of any country in the OECD. We have high levels of anxiety and mental health problems amongst young people. We have high levels of absenteeism from schools. We've got really problematic levels of teacher retention and teacher recruitment. We're not recruiting enough people in, and we're not hanging on to the ones that we do recruit. So there's something that's not working. We have over 1 million young people aged 16 to 19 who are not in education or employment or training. That is a massive waste of talent. And what that then ultimately represents, probably, I'm afraid, is going to be a drain on the taxpayer, because we failed to engage them in education, and they're not engaging in work. So there are too many signs that we're not doing well enough. And I think the prescription for that is we need to have a better balance in the curriculum. We have overly focused on abstract academic knowledge, and that works for some people, but it certainly doesn't work for everyone. And we need to engage not just the head, but the hand and the heart in education. And so we need a better balance around technical skills and around vocational training as well, not just post 16, but 14 to 16 as well. I was able to change the law so that people had to carry on in some form of education until they're 18. So in many ways, I don't think we need the exams at 16 that we've got used to. They've become an anachronism. We could have a national curriculum that finished at 14, and we could free up 14 to 19 to have a phase of learning that is more balanced and that has a lot of depth and a lot of project-based learning, so people can really study things in depth, but has breadth as well. And that at the end of it, what I would really love to see is university admissions being done by more than just certificates of achievement in standardized A levels. Paper certificates are not very intelligent. If you've got an A in maths, it might tell you that you've got 70% in maths. It doesn't tell you which 70% you know about and which you don't know about. It just tells you you've got 70% in a standardized test. Whereas in the digital world, we could assemble a learner profile, a portfolio digitally that could show not only how you've done in academic tests, it could show how you've done in more practical things, it could show what you've done on the stage and on the playing field, it could show the breadth of who you are as a person. And that is more and universities could be equipped with the tools to interrogate that portfolio more precisely and be able to understand far more accurately whether someone's likely to be a success on that course in that university or not. And if we were to move to that portfolio approach, which could also then be used by employers to make hiring decisions, we would, at a stroke, change the culture of schools, which are, in the end, all about university admissions. If what you leave with is the same, whether you're going to university or not, because it's all in this learner profile and this portfolio, I think it would change the culture of schools to be much more inclusive of everybody.
I'm going to ask you one last question, and that is your plans for the future. Do you have things you'd like to rectify in the coming years and put right?
Look, Harry, I've got this real passion about education. So the more I can contribute to the sorts of things I've just been talking about, the better. I'm probably more radical. I'm more about revolution than evolution than the government currently would like. But I'll do what I can. I also have a passion around the online world and making it safer, especially for children. You know, many of us right now have been watching a Netflix series called Adolescence, and have been horrified at that particular story of misogyny and hatred being spread online and consumed by young people, and how it distorts the behavior of, in this case, boys. We've got much more to do to take advantage of the opportunity of technology, but also to regulate it. And I want to be able to make a contribution on that as well. And then, you know, I've got a lovely place in Orkney that I like going to. I've started drawing, pencil drawing, and I want to do more of that. And luxuriate in nature a little bit more than I'm able to from Southwest One.
I feel there's a ton of things I could get into. One of them being, but I won't do it to you, but you know, seaside towns and how we regenerate. That's one of my favorite topics, because I don't see this north-south divide. I just think it's, you know, some places are in poverty and they need help.
Yeah, I don't think we do enough thinking about the core and the periphery in relationship to the two. You know, as an old geographer, I think about that quite a lot. And when I look at the periphery of our country, it really struggles, and it struggles because it's not close enough to the powerhouses of the economy, and the assumption that wealth will trickle down to those places is a naive one, and we need to work harder. Particularly with the sort of footloose nature of the digital economy, we could work harder at spreading wealth to those places.
Well, Jim Knight, it's been a great privilege to have you here, and thank you very much for giving that most precious of commodities your time. Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure, Harry.
Thank you.